let's go ahead and do this. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We got a very special interview with Tim Sheinman over here, the creator of Family. We are super excited to have you with us, Tim. For everybody who's watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, we appreciate your viewership, and as always, we hope that you will be able to jump into the chat, share your questions, share your comments. Of course, if you are familiar with our program, Indie Game Club, we air on Mondays and Thursdays. Mondays, we play a set of games for the week, and on Thursdays, we join up with a group of guests, and we discuss those games. And last night, we spent a good amount of time talking about Family. And Tim Sheinman here is not only did you program it, you did the art, you did the music. I'm incredibly impressed with it, I must say.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It is an amazing experience. And as we're doing this interview, I'll have the video on the side showing off the trailer there, as well as I got some screenshots. And of course, we encourage you to follow Tim. His information is right above us, as well as a link to his itch page and a new Discord, which we should talk about as well. But thank you so much, Tim. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, and as you can tell from the different dialects we speak here, Tim is speaking from across the ocean over in the UK, so we appreciate you arranging the time for this. Tim, I wanted to start off by talking about Family. As I think you saw yesterday on our show, I really found this to be an incredibly moving experience.
Thanks.
Seriously, it's truly amazing. I first heard about it on Indie Games Plus. I think that was one of the first outlets to cover the game.
Yeah, that was Jupiter.
Yeah, and as soon as I saw that, I was just immediately, as somebody who's a fan, once you hear the words detective, mystery, puzzle, those sorts of things, along with the music component, I got really excited about it. Can you tell everybody what is Family?
Okay, so I'm going to try and kill two birds with one stone, because there was a bit on the chat last night where you were saying, what do we call it? Okay, so Family, I always pitch it as a unique detective game of musical genealogy. But what it really is what a lot of people are calling it these days is an Obra-like, which is the new term for what I'm also calling a taxonomic detective game. Basically, you have to uncover all of the members of a fictional 1980s music scene, and the framework for this is a family tree. So you're given this family tree, which is very much in the style of something which actually does exist, which is called Rock Family Trees. And there was a television show called Rock Family Trees as well in Britain in the very late 90s. So it's a real thing. And you need to work out through various musical extracts, through a radio show, which is interviewing a former member of the scene in the current day, or sort of the current day, and also through a lot of written extracts, which are periodically revealed to you. You need to work out who the musicians were, and they will change from band to band. They'll move, they'll sometimes change instruments, and in doing so you also become kind of embedded in their story. I think it's also worth noting that, like, part of the engine that drives Family is the songs, which is that each band has a song, and there's actually a song at the end as well, which is very
amazing,
very musical, I think. It's like end with a song. But
Absolutely.
so the engine of it is that there's 8 songs, and you can get those also on Bandcamp as well if you want. And some people buy them. It's crazy. It's very, very odd. They're about a minute long, and that was the work of me in a frenzied rush just before my daughter was born, and a couple of friends and sort of acquaintances and good recommendations, and we pulled it all together over the course of about a month. So the programming was done in about 2 weeks. Then we had a lot of trouble with vocalists, getting the right vocalists. Then we got the right vocalists. Then we finished it. So June 7th, it was conceived. Shortest term in the world. There was July 7th, it was finished, and then it sort of had about a month and a half of fresh air in the world, and it's great. It's the little game that could. I'm really, really happy with it.
Yeah, we want to talk more about the music, because you have quite the musical background. So we're excited to discuss that. Let's start off with the trailer, actually, for people to get a better understanding of the game here.
Yeah, sorry if I kind of deviated.
Oh, no problem. Here, it's Aaron for people right now.
Or went too deep. I was just going to close the window because there's some wind Those wind chimes were big. I had to like.
Hold on 1 second. We're airing the trailer right here.
Yeah.
I should have told you. This is the fun of doing it live. Hopefully everybody got to hear both there. We had not only the audio from family, but some good wind chimes. Well, no, I wanted to actually play. We're going to play some of the soundtrack as well.
Yeah.
We're going to play some of the soundtrack there. But hopefully everybody gets an idea here, as Tim said, with the kind of the family tree, and that's the main focus of the game, is to try to discover these 30 names that you're placing on there. What really fascinated me, and kind of I like the taxonomy when you're bringing up. Did you say Ober-like, or what was the term you used? In that case?
That's what people are calling it now. They call them Ober-like, because I made a few of them now. I mean, I think that we're going to talk about Richard Fleming in a bit. I think that is an Ober-like.
Okay.
I don't think Russian Doll is an Ober-like. I think Russian Doll is a puzzle game of a much more cut and dry. And actually, I don't think it's quite as good personally. But like, they're of a piece with each other. But yeah, that's so it's about putting stuff in lists. And the only real way of talking about this is to talk about the history of detective games, which feels like a bit of a lurch right at the start of the show. But it is something I've thought about a bit.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely. And I'm happy to go there. I do want to cover just a couple things here first. When you say Ober-like, just to clarify for our audience there, that's a reference, I'm assuming in this case, to the Return of the Obra Dinn, Lucas Pope game.
Yeah, so Lucas Pope is the king of bureaucratic games, right? So he made Papers, Please, where you were a border guard and you had to sort through paperwork and use your big sexy brain to work out whether people were doing the right things and whether they should be allowed through. And then he made Return of the Obra Dinn, where you play an insurance adjuster and you have to use a magic pocket watch in order to work out the fates of the 60 or so people who were aboard the ship. And it's a really good game. It's got this genius 1-bit style, and I think I got a little comment the other day. Actually, it wasn't on it. It was on something else, which they said, trying to find the drummer of Dova Pavlova is like trying to differentiate between Chinese top men. And if you ever played Obra Dinn, you remember just the terrible difficulty of differentiating between Chinese top men. So that was, because you're trying to sort through them on the manifest and stuff, and it's just awful. And I was really happy with that. So yeah, I think Lucas Pope is maybe the most influential solo developer alive at the moment. It's hard to think of anyone else other than maybe Bennett Foddy, who's had such an effect on the game space. And what Pope has really at the heart of what he does is this ability to cut the Gordian knot of gameplay, which is that normally with games you spend an awful lot of time programming a lot of interacting systems in order to tell a story, or at least allow for some sort of physical interaction with the game. So, you spend a lot of time tuning jumps and creating platforms and creating collision and creating particles. And Lucas Pope doesn't do any of that. Well, he does some of it, but like for the most part, what he does is he relies on the audience, the player, to use their brain and their imagination to get into something, and he gives them just enough. So at the end of the day, from a programming perspective, he took 3.5 years on making this incredible ship, but if he was just using the book, he could have probably programmed it in about 6 days or something like that, because all it is a validation thing. All it does is just checks, have you put the right thing in, counts up to 3, and then says, well done. At that point, there's a little bit more to it, and he did some nice effects with it. But and with Papers, Please, you just either put yes or no, and it's either right or it's wrong, and you either get fined or you don't. And everything else is in the mind of the player. And I think that is genius. And that's the real power of taxonomic detective games, the ability to put stuff into lists, because the computer can check whether you're right or wrong in a very simple way. But it's not like it's just trying to progress the story like in The Witcher or Batman, where you're going into detective mode. But really what you're doing is just following a kind of little dotted line or a vapor trail or something, and just being guided through the story and pretending you're a detective. Or L.A. Noire, which is very similar because it's so linear, that it's all kind of happening in order, and then you get this grade and you think, what the hell was that? You could have done better. Her story is different because her story doesn't have a validation mechanism. The player has to, although there are some effects, and without giving away any spoilers, there are some effects which occur at key points. It doesn't actually give you a score, and it doesn't really tell you if you're right or wrong. It's for the player essentially to decide when the game is over for them. Whilst with Obra Dinn, there is an end, which is when
Yeah.
you complete, the thing. And so her story was kind of a step on the way to the Obra Dinn, which was making the player use their brain and connect up the dots. But it didn't go the whole way to making it fully into a game. In a way, her story is the most realistic of the lot,
Yeah.
except it's
It's one of my
incredibly
favorite games.
contrived at the same time. Yeah, but it's a really cool idea, and it was done really well. And no one's done it again apart from
Sam
the
Barlow,
creator.
I guess, yeah, did it once
Yeah,
more with Telling Lies, which we were both talking
yeah,
about planning on checking out soon. I'm gonna show real quick on the full
yeah,
screen here a screenshot of the game to give everyone a better idea of this. So
yeah,
as you're
yeah,
playing this game, as Tim said, you're looking through these kind of mementos, these notes, these interviews, band kind of memorabilia of sorts of that era, and then you're using
yeah.
that information along with the radio interviews, along with the music itself. It's a true like multimedia detective experience to identify the names you see there. And I will say to the person who said about the drummer of Dova Pavlova, that probably was, I think for many of us was the last one that might have been
I
the
mean,
second to last one for me.
yeah, it's the synth player for Clanger and then the drummer for Dova Pavlova. That's the way it goes. And
Yes.
the synth player for Clanger is completely fair. It's completely fair, and it is perfectly well hinted, and it can be done through a very simple process of elimination relating to a certain memo.
Yes.
Um,
Which I didn't discover until another playthrough, actually. Because that one,
Dover is
I was gonna get you on that one. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna call you out on one of these. But no, you're
Dover,
totally right.
Dover is less fair, and really was a bit of a gaff. But the
Really,
problem was, well, it wasn't a gaff. I just felt that by the end that there had to be one that rewarded a little bit of a hit and hope. But to be honest, by that point, you'd be so sure that you'd probably try everything in it, and you'd be so deeply invested that, oh god, I was just so tired. My daughter was 2 weeks old at that point.
wow.
I was so tired. And I think no, I think the Dover Pavlov drummer has become a bit notorious for people feeling that there's nothing dropped in, but there
There
is.
is for sure.
There is, because she's involved. Ooh, the drummer is
Uh oh.
involved. The drummer is involved with a group that is related to the group that they end up playing in.
Yes.
And so that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
Yeah, I agree.
That's,
I agree.
yeah.
And that's the exciting part, I mean, about playing this game is as a player, this feels so clever in a way that it's really hard to describe. To your point about kind of these Obra like games of I guess would you would put her story in that category as well? Like
No, I think you have to have a taxonomy to be
okay.
an Oprah. Like, I
Gotcha.
think you have to have a book or a list or a chart or something like
Gotcha.
that.
That's like your key factor.
You need to have answers. That's what it is. I mean, for instance, if
I
we talk about
see.
Richard Fleming, there's just answers. That's not a
Yes.
list. I mean, I wrote a little tweet last night. I'll just grab it from last night. I said how to make an Oprah like. Let's just see where it is. I said you just, I mean, you just look. What you do is you pick an event or a time. You make a list of things that you're going to compile from that, usually people or something about that. You have a list of clues which lead to those people, and then you just scramble up all the clues. There's a lot more to it than that to make a good one, but that's kind of the heart of it, which is that it ties in with a kind of unearthing of information that appeals to people who listen to true crime podcasts and
Sure.
conduct amateur genealogy and go on Google,
Yes.
and go down rabbit
Yes.
holes on Wikipedia.
Absolutely.
It's that mindset.
That's what I believe I made that point yesterday on our show when we were
Yeah,
talking about that whole idea that's kind of the closest most of us get to kind of detective work, and we oftentimes do it. You watching a
yeah,
movie with your wife, and then you see an actor and you're like, that person was in this, and you're suddenly down a Wikipedia 10-hour binge, and you're suddenly reading about Sri Lankan history or something like that, right? So
hmm
I really like what you did there, and I also want to kind of go back to one of the points we talked yesterday about that the game doesn't really hold your hand, and that to your point about there having to be answers, you're not requiring the players to answer these problems in a specific order. Starting off, of course, you give them like a semi-limited amount of information,
Yeah,
which they
yeah.
can take in a certain direction. But I was quite fascinated by the fact when I watched the other streamers and guests, some of them are on the chat right
They all
here.
did it
They took
differently,
different
right?
directions.
And I
Yeah.
bet they all thought that the way they did it was totally natural, and that's the way that
Yes.
everybody would do
Exactly.
it. Yeah, I mean, it's overloaded. I mean, that's the thing. There is an overloading. So I think originally I was going to have all the clues just out at once, and then right towards the end I was like, maybe that's not what I should do. And actually, it would have been a game-breaking problem if I'd done that, because it would have given people no sense of chronology. Because actually, the written clues, which are the most telling, unfold chronologically. And roughly chronologically, and so you get a sense of flow, and you get a sense of the progression of history through it, whilst also getting a light difficulty curve as well. And the way I built that is, I know that Lucas Pope did something else, is he just had a logic grid. It's a bit like, do you remember Dishonored 2? You remember the Jindosh lock?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like that. You've got a grid with all the names of the people, and you've got two columns. You've got one where you tell what instrument, and one where you tell what band they're in. And you pick out when it's going to occur. And so obviously with the first two clues, to make it fair, right, you have to give 5 things across those two. But then as you get further and further, you can start to stagger them, so that you could always, so let's say you need 5, right? Okay, so but let's say that you actually give 6 good clues in those two bits of information you have. Well, that leaves you 1 spare. So what that means is the next time is you don't need to give as many clues as what's the next, but you can kind of hold 1 back, so you can it means that you've given 1 in credit for the next round. So that means that the next round can maybe start hinting at something that happens much later, or it can actually leave something completely hanging until much later in the game, because you've got that spare. So I know that mathematically the player is able to complete enough. The other thing is that the radio, a lot of people think that the radio is necessary. The radio is not necessary. The radio is complete profit, and it's great if you use it, but it would never been fair to make people go around 20 minutes of radio and listen to like Clarice Montague over and over again to catch a line. It's in there.
Yeah.
So for instance, when, this isn't a spoiler, but when Ella says, because it's in there, when Ella says, these people I've worked with, you're like, I've worked with.
Yeah.
But that's all profit. And then again with the tracks, I think I did actually take out some clues which identified singers who sing across this. Like, I took for granted that the audience would be able to hear that it was firstly a guy or a girl singing.
Yeah.
Except for Deva Pavlova, which is just me doing a very high voice, and that they wouldn't need to be told it was the same person. I had earlier in the game, I had a few more clues which said that this person is that person, it's the same person, but then I just kind of,
how much? Yeah. What was the development process of this? Because I've noticed, like, looking at your itch page, you have, I believe, 12 or so games on your itch page right now, and they're all have been released within the last few months, it seems like. So were these games you were sitting on and just recently put on, or are these games that you were literally producing? What's your history in game development in this area?
So this is the terrible truth, which is I started games development 4.5 months ago.
That's amazing. That's not a terrible truth. That's incredibly impressive.
So all right, so I was a teacher for like 10 years, and then I ran my own business for a couple of years, and it was pretty boring. And a few things happened which led me to think I didn't want to be in education anymore. I was running something just a tutoring agency, and it's a great time to be out of education, I can tell you that. So as you guys know, so I enrolled on a master's course at a place called Goldsmiths, which is a London university. And, I was really excited and I had a bit of time, and then lockdown happened, and, we got a certain amount of, money towards our businesses here. So I had nothing but time to, prepare. And, I just thought, maybe I should start doing Unity. And the best way to do it is to do some game jams. So I did some game jams. And then really Family is the first proper non-game jam game that I did. So it just kind of just sort of came to me. But I mean, I've got, I taught a bit of computer science, not a ton. I did a lot of like processing stuff, which is a kind of arts-based JavaScript-based language. But like, basically, the programming I actually do for family is reasonably simplistic. It's actually non-programming stuff that does all the heavy lifting for family. It's the design aspect that does the heavy lifting. But yeah, no, I mean, I only mean using Unity like from the ground up. Like I could go on my Git page and it would say early February.
That's
tops.
incredible. That's incredible.
Right.
So all of these games that are on your page right now are all.
Yeah. So the first
months?
one is like you can see the development. Like you see,
Sure,
the first one
yeah.
is like a typing game.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. That's the first game I built.
Yeah,
So-
I've noticed a sort of trend in the work that you have on your itch page is that there's a lot to deal with, puzzle solving, logic. There's a lot of kind of, you said the typing kind of component, like the math component. All of this is like when you watch this work, you can kind of see, just like how family has like the tree and you can see how things go. It seems like you can see how family is a culmination of these types of ideas.
It's like they were made by a freaking teacher, aren't they? It's like half of them is spelling, the other half is maths, one's more coding, and this one's genealogy. So it's like, and then there's this massive theme of radio drama that runs through all the latest stuff, courtesy of a million books on tape and no games consoles as a child. So, it's like you're looking at a guy who watched a lot of people play their Sega Mega Drives from about the age of 8 to 13,
but didn't have them.
and did not have them, and listened to like Blackadder and Monty Python and various radio and various books on tape like round the clock, basically. So all the recent stuff is basically British radio. There's a very, very strong element of British radio and British audio culture that runs through all of the new stuff.
Well, it's nice to hear about your teaching background because at Potions and Pixels we develop games kind of that try to bridge this kind of we don't like the term edutainment, right? Because I think growing up, I think we're of a similar generation. Like there was those games where it seemed like it was designed by an educator that didn't know game design at all, and it was just roll a dice and answer a trivia question. But this truly is designed in a way that I feel experiential. I think is the best way to kind of put it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was talking about this a little bit with I was talking with this guy Aidan last night about this, and I was just comparing this to. So I played there's a very, very good game called Before I Forget, right? Which is about a woman with early onset dementia, and it's very, very beautifully rendered. It's very well acted. It's what people kind of fondly call a walking simulator, and what's quite interesting about it is that it's about an hour long, so it's kind of the same length as my game, but it's obviously, would have taken a lot long in development and stuff like that. But the way it delivers its story is a very kind of tell sort of way. You're getting told a lot of stuff and you're getting a story kind of told to you. And I suppose that's quite, common in a lot of walking simulators. I didn't put that there, this thing, that thing. There's a bit at the end where she has to fight with her husband. It's all played out, stuff like that. Yeah. And I thought it's quite interesting because it's a very good game in its own right. But it's quite low on what you'd call we have a term, I suppose you have in America, which is called Bloom's taxonomy, which is an educational idea, right? Okay, so which is that telling things to people, they'll retain a certain amount and they might think about it a bit. But if you ask people to kind of tangle with it a little bit more, like if you have a good teacher, and they ask you to comprehend stuff and evaluate stuff and maybe even like come to some conclusions about these things, that will engage your level of stimulation and also your intake a lot more. And I think, and I wasn't thinking about this at the time, but I think that's what family does. And I think that's quite interesting. So for instance, like a couple of yours were talking about Alex Adam, right?
Yeah.
And they had quite a visceral reaction to him, right?
Sure.
And there's often dislikable people in video games, but people seem to really fucking hate Alex. Like, there's a Rock Paper Shotgun review where she just like shits on him. Sorry, just like
no, you're right.
Absolutely shits on him, and it's kind of like this guy's obviously a type, but I think it's probably because you've been asked to engage with everyone around him on this quite sort of deep evaluative level. Like my favorite person in the game is Gale, like who I think of as like, although Ella is maybe like the heart of the game, like the emotional, like the steady center. Like to me, there would be no London music scene without Gale. I'm not going to say what she does, but she basically runs through it like a stick of rock. And to me, she represents kind of the opposite, which is a kind of stalwart, fairly tough, no nonsense musician who gets on with it and supports people who are quite difficult.
Yeah, and so as far that's the part that I think this game, what
Sorry, I'm
really.
going so off topic.
No, no, no. I love this. This is what this is all about.
Yeah,
This kind of
all right,
freeform
yeah,
conversation. So please,
yeah, yeah.
but I think that's the part that excites me so much because it's interesting when you talk about developing the game and the taxonomy. You're talking about it from like a very logical, like mathematical manner. But I think so many people experience this game with that strong emotional connection as well. So
Yeah.
I think it's a testament to the
Yeah, it's a love
choices you
letter.
made. Yes.
Yeah, it's a love letter to pop music, right? So I mean, like, I'm talking about this from a game design perspective, and maybe it's because I'm on a gaming, kind of podcast and stuff. But like, I'm a musician. I was a musician for 20 years. I grew up on this actually, I grew up in music slightly later than this. I got into this a bit later, and actually, some of the bands, like for instance, the Cocteau Twins, and stuff, I'm not like mad keen on, but I did like a lot of the bands, and I do like this era of pop music a lot. To me, it's like, looking back on it, it's a lot more interesting than Britpop. It was more politically diverse. There weren't quite as many girls as I put in my game. In fact, there weren't that many at all. But like, it was more politically interesting, and it was just, a lot of it was just better music actually than sort of, the Blur Oasis stuff that came later, even though it was pretty good, and I love that music. And but I was also in a scene, I was in many, many music scenes playing stuff. And I think that, the culture that surrounds art is often more interesting than the art itself.
Interesting.
And I suppose that family, I think Chuck Cloisterman says that as well, and so I think that it's like, I think that family is really a game about the culture of people that surrounds art. They're all struggling to make art. And I had these original, actually, I think I cut some of this from the intro because it was getting too wordy and a bit too cheesy. But, being in a band really meant something. People used to just go on the dole, which is benefits in England, and just go on the dole and just drop out. It was a much more personally political statement to be in a rock band in the 70s and 80s and stuff like that than it is now. Now it's very much a kind of, what's it, preserve for the rich really these days. But it's, and it was very interesting. But I mean, I wrote a master's on team roles within musical groups. So I did like an anthropological study.
Something you've been preparing for.
Yeah. So
was this in the back of your mind for a long time? I mean, were you always? Is this like a project, like a dream project that you've had for a long time, or?
Never in the back of my mind.
Never. Okay.
I was sitting on the couch, and I thought, "Oh, family tree could work." That was it.
But was this what you started on 4.5 months ago, or did you like when did family, like the actual the work on family start?
Bolts of Lightning was on June 7th, and it was finished by July 7th.
That is incredible. All the music completed as well, everything.
Music was written in about like everything except the bloody vocalists, who I love. Yeah. The ones I got, not the ones who didn't write back. That the songs were written about a week, and which
That's
is
incredible.
It's freaking nuts, isn't it? It's like what was going on? But it's easier to write a brief. Like if you tell people to like spill your guts out and give us the most genuine thing, it's whatever. But sometimes if you say, oh, it's make something sound like Smiths, and also it's easier when it's 1.5 minutes because you don't have to worry about. You can put all your arrangement tricks up front. You don't need to worry about what's going to happen after the second verse or whatever. It is easier, But like, yeah, it was a bit surprising. It's not meant to happen like that. I can assure you, it is not meant to work like that. Games are meant to be freaking agony.
Yeah, I'm actually playing the soundtrack right now. Just I know you can't hear it on your end, but I have it really low just so everybody can kind of hear it through. And I encourage everybody, they can download the soundtrack as well, right?
Oh yeah, you can pay for a bit, or you don't have to pay anything for it. It's pay what you want. Same as the game. I don't know. It's family. It seems like a weird thing to say because games are meant to be complete agony and they're meant to be just terrible, and you're meant to live in a pit of hell. But actually, I used to find it more with songwriting. Like when I was songwriting, I used to find it much harder. But I find that kind of games, you've got so much stuff. You can do a bit of art, and a bit of music, and as long as you kind of keep the muscle loose. In a respect, that creative muscle, I find that if you don't tighten up, you can get a lot done, because there's enough to get on with, and it's that mix of technical and creative that kind of is sort of, sort of meshes, quite like it. But Family was like a really, apart from getting vocalists, which was tough, it was a really untroubled development, and it mostly came together because it had legs, and that's because it had a taxonomy at the center of it. And often when you have an idea that has somewhere it can go, it's because it has a framework within which it can express itself. And it seemed to me that, like, okay, so I've got this family tree. Okay, so I've got all these bands. Okay, so they're going to have biographies. Okay, so it's going to have music. Okay, so it's going to have a radio show. That came a little bit later. Okay, so we're going to have some written extracts. It's only 10 written extracts. Like, it's not that much. I mean, like, I love it.
But to do it in 1 month, you can't sell yourself short on that. I mean, that's truly incredible. I mean, how much did the game change during that time? I mean, it sounds like, according to what you're telling me, it's like you had a plan and everything just kind of fell into place after that.
Yeah, it was straight through. There's no drafts of Family.
Okay. And you said that there wasn't many playtesters really involved as well, right? Like this is...
No, I mean, I had to go in blind. I mean, all I had was a grid which showed that the clues were right. I mean, the first week afterwards, I was like to my wife, "Is this a good game?" She was like, "I think it's a good game." It's like, yeah. But I mean, I think it's really good that people really like Family. I don't think that Family is like a masterpiece or anything. Like, I'm not sitting around being like, "This is what I have to offer to the world." Like when I finished it, I got a sense that it was different from the other games that I made, and it has been like this ridiculous ride. And like it has no right to have got the sort of level of publicity that it had. Maybe it does, but like what is, it's not for me to say, but like, it's just ridiculous that these editors who work so hard and write a gazillion, like they pick up their emails and they write back and they get it going, and it's just gaming culture is incredible. Like, coming from a music background, it's
Can we talk about? I think you're selling yourself short. I might have even used the words masterpiece actually in describing this game. So I'm one of those fans. But just talking about like the journalistic outlets. I mean, Rock Paper Shotgun, Eurogamer, PC Gamer, Buried Treasures. Of course, I mentioned Indie Games Plus. Yeah, you're picking up steam here and getting a ton of amazing attention for this.
Yeah, I think we're going to get Sixth Axis later this week. He's written back. He's just trying to get there. And then, Chris at Polygon's passed it on to the reviews team, but it's out of his hands now. But he's very nice as well. Like, it's going to be an Edge magazine as well, which is like fantastic. A subsidiary of Games Radar. So it's like the printed.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Hey, but that's Chris Schilling, and Chris is incredibly nice as well. And this is what I found, which is like freelancers are lovely people, but living in desperate and dangerous times. It's like Mad Max out there, for freelancers. But editors, they can get stuff written, And I feel really lucky that it's actually been written up by a lot of editors. So Robert Purchase, brilliant writer at Eurogamer. He wrote it up. John Walker, obviously, he was the founder of Rock Paper. That was the first one. That's what got it all started. So and Jupiter Hadley, what can you say about Jupiter? She's sort of force of nature, and it's done really well. I'm just glad it's in the hands of people, and it's lovely, like having art out in public. Like, it's not something I ever got to do as a musician. I've got music on Spotify and stuff. It's not out there, So it's like, so to be able to actually have things in the world and be able to talk about it like this is it's why we do it, really.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, we have some comments that we'd like to read in here.
Okay.
So a few things coming in from Dee, actually, who was a guest the other day, who absolutely loved this as well. Who herself is a professor, so she has a education background.
The English teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Dee wrote, "I'm so glad that Tim was willing to do this interview, and I love that there was a harder name or two for the game. It was great." She was referencing the Dova Pavlova Planger. She says that, "I'm glad you gave the clues in waves. Nice to see another educator in gaming. Gail is my favorite. She feels like the backbone," and she says, I feel like you might have not intended it to be a masterpiece, but I think it became one." So those are great compliments. Thank you so much, Dee. Thanks, Scarlett.
Yeah, no, thanks for. I mean, it's in the eye of the beholder, really. I think that it was different, and different can be good. It's I like Family. I mean, I haven't played it in a little while. I played tested it so much, but there was no point in me replaying. I do listen to the music occasionally, though. I really. I think it was pretty good, actually, some of that music. But yeah, it was. Yeah.
And it's been interesting because when I first heard about this, I think I had the same reaction that I'm seeing other people posting online, that they thought this music was real. And I think we can, I guess, check out with Google, but there's probably people that are checking, Googling for the Rialtos and the
Yeah,
watercolors
well,
and all
I'll
these
tell
other
you a
groups, right?
story. So when I was first starting out, when I was first got the game out, I wrote off to a few kind of people I admire, and I got quite an irate email back from a very, very significant indie developer whose most famous game doesn't rhyme with, but is spelt very similarly to the word massage. And he was quite annoyed. You'll have to work out what that is.
Yeah, it's a puzzle. It's a Tim
It's a
Sheinman
puzzle.
puzzle.
He's very, very significant in the history of indie development. And he was quite irate because he said, "Why are you doing this? Like, you could have picked any scene. Nobody knows anything about this." No, I was like,
My mind immediately goes to Passage, but I'm not sure if that's
it was days.
Yes, okay.
And I was like, "Why? Why did you do it about this scene?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's not real." So he's like, "Oh, I see." Mental silence.
Was the complaint was that it was?
He was like, "I don't know these bands. No one knows these bands."
Not to call him out, but just for context, Jason Rohr, right? I'm trying to remember all my indie knowledge on display. This is one of the few times I get to talk about indie games here.
Yeah. So like one of the most significant like early developers of indie games, still a very significant developer of indie games. Has an unreadable website, but does pick up his emails. He thought they were real bands, and he was a bit like, "This is a bad idea. You've made some bad choices." But it's kind of no. We did get this a lot more, and on the web version, I actually thank members of the London pop scene. I don't credit myself. So if you pick up the download version, it credits me. And then when I was making the web version, I accidentally broke the download version. I couldn't get it back, so I couldn't change it. It's completely broken. I'm not even sure where the source code is anymore, actually. I think my OneDrive did something strange. I'm not even sure where it is. It's on Git. I've got it on Git. It's public, actually, if anyone wants to see it. People thought it was real. I mean, there's lots of bits on Itch of people in the early days being like, "How can I find this band?" Or, just where's this band? So, hey, I mean, it's great, but that's kind of the point of Family, is it's about a forgotten era. Like, I didn't pick Britpop, I didn't pick grunge. And a lot of people have been like, "Can you do another scene?" That's been the biggest request has been, "Can you do a sequel? What's the sequel?" I say, what scenes do you want? And they're like, "Oh, I'd like Random Strokes, please," and that sort of thing. San Francisco, 1960s. Oh, the best one was actually like 1950s, like what was the film with Oscar Isaac, Llewellyn Davis sort of period. I was like, that would actually have been really good, but it was done. It was done in Llewellyn Davis, and very well. But I think to pick something deliberately a little scuzzy and obscure is the right choice, because that feeds into the mythos of it. And I guess the Family has a little bit of mystery that I'm now working exceptionally hard to dispel, as the most forthcoming game developer.
And I think what's interesting about all those eras that you mentioned is the thing they have in common is they're all pre-internet, right? I was talking to my son about this, who's, will be 12 this year. And when I described it to him, his reaction was, "Well, can't you just Google the names?"
You got to go to record shops and you got to find stuff. So I'm just going to adjust my mic. You got to find stuff and you got to search it up. I mean, fondness for that sort of thing is secondary to me. But what I have a real fondness for is, and actually a lot of Brits have this, and you'll see this a lot, is what I'd call crap Britain, which is that before about 1995, 96, before the new Labour, basically, before Tony Blair came in, right? And became the first kind of presidential prime minister, and we had this big wave of optimism. Britain was basically pissed off for about 30 years. We had Margaret Thatcher, and I think there's a line in Austin Powers where he says, "Oh, it was just gas strikes and a flock of seagulls," And I wasn't really that much a part of it because I was very young, but I have this enormous affection for crap TV shows and bad production quality, and I really despise the fact that with Netflix it takes about 10 minutes to work out if a show is any good now, because there's all these slow-mo pans and everything's got this exceptionally high production quality. You can't tell if stuff's good until you're like, "This has no substance to it," whatever, and you have to sit through all lengths of whole programs to work out if it's any good because it looks so good. And with Britain, you didn't used to have that. It used to be, cheese and onion pies, crinkle cut crisps, crap high street, and I think that was the great joy of doing the radio broadcasting. I was putting on my radio voice and, I was saying, driving you home in the afternoon, all smooth, all day, all the time, because this is it's not a very good show, this one, it's a bit of a crap DJ who's doing a bit of a crap voice, it's just being listened to by old people in Sussex, it's that sort of thing, and that's what I like, And there's that. My favorite source is with Gail M's talking to Mike Joyce, which is really cheeky. But because
I like the humor that you put into the game. There's all these little things that add to that mythos. That
I like the Ryder one where they're asking for bottles of Baby Sham and Space Raiders. These are the most dreadful British foods. The most dreadful British foods. The sort of thing that only Brits would request on a Ryder. You wouldn't touch these things. Sherbet dips and stuff like that. It's just terrible.
Yeah, some of those might be UK specific references that us in the States might not be able to fully get.
There's a reference in the Gale letter which no one has ever mentioned because it's quite time specific, but there's a bit where she says, I hope Johnny has a good time in LA.
Yeah.
And what happens is that the Smiths broke up whilst Johnny was in LA. No, it wasn't that. It was the New Musical Express said that they were breaking up. He got back and he was so pissed off that he broke up the band, basically. And that I found out that the years worked, so I was like, put that in. So excited by that one. Yeah, I actually made a game called Sleeping with the Enemy earlier as well, which is a kind of light-hearted riff on Lucas Pope's Republic Times, where you have to cook up really sleazy headlines for a British magazine.
Yeah, in the 90s. That's the Enemy, right? That's
the Enemy. Yeah, so
exactly. I enjoyed playing that one as well. Yeah, all of these games you can find available. If you look at the top, you can see Tim's link. Yeah, all free. Yeah, how has that worked out for you? I mean, as somebody who's involved in the game development side and everything like that, how does that work?
I feel like I've paid my dues, and the next one will be lightly charged at around $3 because we've had 5,000 plays and 1,000 downloads, and it's like, gosh, I could, we've had nice donations, and it's always nice. But I think the next one, I think it's just probably a good time to mention this, that I am making a companion piece. I'm not calling it a sequel, although a lot of people will call it a sequel. I'm making a companion piece to Family.
Ooh.
It's a whole new game. It's not DLC. And it's about halfway through development right now.
Exciting. So you were essentially working on it right when Family was released. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I got the itch. All the songs are written. They're mostly recorded. I'm working with some fantastic vocalists. We're going to have more voice acting, so it's going to be more like Richard Fleming, which we might discuss more. So there's going to be more interplay between playable clips and readable text and images as well. There's going to be image deciphering as well in there. And it's going to be set in the States.
Okay.
And it's going to be more about two people than a whole scene, although there will be a whole cast of characters. It's going to be about a rivalry over 15 years. And this is the nice treat for North Carolinians. It's going to be about the alt country movement, which, of course, bands like Whiskey Town and stuff, they're from North Carolina. And it's going to take in the whole sweep from 1995 to 2010 of the alt country. So it's going to have songs in the style of various groups from them. But it's going to be mostly about a very strong rivalry. And anyone who knows anything about alt country, if you are listening, those 6 people, there's a very distinctive rivalry between 2 people in alt country, which I won't mention, but you will be familiar with, and it's very loosely based on that, but it's based on lots of other stuff like the movie Dig and stuff like that. So it's it's going to be
exciting.
Yeah, so that's gonna be.
You heard it here first, people. You heard it here first on Indie Game Club.
I am hoping to get that in alpha in the next few weeks. So I'll send you a copy when we're done. Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But we're making good headway with that. We've got one singer in the bag who I'm really confident about. We just need another, and there's less voices on this one, but just as many songs.
And when you say companion, and you're specifically saying it's not a sequel, are we still expecting the same overall type of gameplay here? Is that
it'll be taxonomic. It'll have a different type of taxonomy. It'll be about someone trying to complete a kind of biography of the two. So it's going to involve that sort of taxonomy. And It's going to be of a very similar length. It's going to be of a very similar difficulty. It might have a little bit of tricky. It might have a little bit of meta puzzles as well that I'm thinking of as well. It's going to be a bit more sophisticated because I've learned a few more things, but it's going to be, I would say, people will say it's the American cousin or the American brother to it. And it's got a good feel. I'm really digging it at the moment. I'll send you a screenshot of the UI after this. I'm afraid I can't do that quite yet because it's not quite there yet today, but I mocked it up and I'm really happy with it. I think it's really vibrant. It's going to be a really good story. Yeah, so we just got to get it together. So it's really now just about deadlines. So it's mostly about writing scripts for people, getting good recordings, writing good copy, and chatting with a lot of people from certain regions to make sure that this Englishman gets it right. It's going to be set in Minneapolis as well, which is I have a sentimental family in Minneapolis, so I can kind of draw on that a bit. And of course, Minneapolis is a great place to set anything musical.
Yeah,
because it's a cultural
city, for sure. Yeah.
So yeah, don't hold me to it. If this turns out like Chinese democracy and like 6 years later, what happened with that?
What happened, Tim?
But I feel like we've got I always think the songs are the engine, and we're kind of now we've got the songs. The engine is in place, and I feel like it's body work. So we're in the running.
And so you created the music for family. You're creating the music for this game, but you obviously bring in other kind of vocalists and others. And in this case, with the North Carolina's accent and potentially other kind of American-based accents.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to kind of play it fast and loose. I mean, there's always stuff you can do in fiction. You can always have people moving in from out of town and stuff like that. You know, I mean, that's something you can create these narrative contrivances to make it work. And I'm going to work with whoever is right for the job, you know. But I think in terms of like the biggest thing for me is getting the kind of regional details, because I think that if family was very generic, it wouldn't be family. It's about those little details. Yes. And I think that nearly every written bit is written with a somewhat journalistic eye for extreme detail, and that's what sells it. Because at the end of the day, like the fact that people are getting a really good sense of literally written extracts is nuts, considering that, you know, when you play like Horizon Zero Dawn or whatever, the amount of cutscenes and stuff that they put into like character development and stuff like that, millions and millions of dollars, you know. So you got to do a lot of heavy lifting with your writing and stuff like that. So yeah, got some really good voice acting as well for this. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, and so, and I want to bring in your other game, The Remains of Richard Fleming, here in a moment,
right, because
what
do you think of it?
I absolutely loved it.
Brilliant.
I absolutely loved it. And before we jump to that, to talk about your point about like the writing and kind of drawing you in, I think, you know, I was looking at kind of the reactions that this game has gotten. Like we were, before we went live, we were talking about how amazing it is for people to, like we said, the game's available on itch. Itch has like a kind of a certain fan base of sorts, maybe kind of like a family type player, you know, the people who might be involved in that scene. Agreed. Right? And so I think it's a great platform to release. It's kind of our main source of discovery. As you saw with our show, a lot of our games kind of come from the racial justice bundle and things of that nature.
It's because it's got a developer base at the heart of it.
Yes.
Because the game jams run off it. So that's why. And it has a constant flow of just nice, fresh ideas coming through off the game jam. So it's basically like a freshwater stream of the game jam feeding into the main, which Steam doesn't have because it's very hard to get into Steam.
Sure.
You know.
And the thing that kind of, I was talking earlier about like kind of the emotional resonance of it all. Like at the beginning of the game, you have that interview with Ella, one of the musicians of this era that you explore, and she talks about kind of looking fondly back at the era of like how great it was, but then also says kind of, you know, with sadness about how a lot of these bands couldn't make it. A lot of them have been forgotten. Right. And to me, that whole idea, I wonder how the reaction has been to that, because I mentioned on the show yesterday how just even the fact of like picking up like an old photo or reading something from an older era, especially pre-internet, like immediately to me like has some emotional resonance. And I'm curious about the reaction to that component of it all.
I mean, I think that's the most strictly like autobiographical element of it. Like, I would say the family is like 100% autobiography, except for the people and the things. You know, it's like nothing in it happened to me, and all the people are fictional. but it's completely autobiographical. And I think that, yeah, musicians are worried about their legacies. They're worried about making a difference, and they're worried about communicating and stuff. And I think that there's something about, I thought it was very emotional. I mean, people don't talk about it. I think that I find it quite strange. I mean, one of your people on the stream referred to really enjoying Hattie's music. She kind of obliquely referred to that. And I feel like Hattie doesn't get enough. This is Ella, by the way. Hattie's a very dear friend of mine who we go back about 20 years, and a genius musician and comedian. And she's kind of the heart of the whole thing. Like, she delivers the thematics at both ends of the game, and she delivers much of the emotional commentary throughout the game itself. Like, without Hattie, I think the game is severely diminished, which is funny because actually Alex Adam was originally written for the script to be on the radio. And I wrote him out because the times didn't work. Like, the original guy I had him to be Alex couldn't do it for a month, so I thought I wrote him out. And in the meantime, I thought maybe it's better that it's not, because he's turning into a bit of a prick, you know. So maybe this isn't the person I want to have leading up my game, you know. Yes, I think there is an enormous amount of emotional resonance. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I kind of think for me, it's come from the same place as you, which is, you know, there's just something quite wrenching and yearning about just, you know, people who don't quite make it, you know, and rock history is kind of full of that, isn't it? You know, Syd Barrett and you know, Rocky Erickson from 13th Floor Elevators, people who just kind of, you know, just couldn't keep it together. They had it all and it just fell apart. And I think that is a very big part of kind of rock iconography. And nobody actually dies in Family, you know, but like, although you kind of feel like it's in the post a little bit for some people, you know, but it's like, yeah, it's in there. It was definitely in there. And it wasn't a nostalgia in a kind of like, remember the 90s sort of thing. It was about, I guess it was about contribution, but it was also about bearing witness. You know, it was about the importance of people remembering what you do. And in that respect, it made sense to talk about a fictional analog of a scene rather than an actual scene itself, because that's what, you know, as David Foster Wallace says, you know, fiction allows you to experience things outside of yourself more than non-fiction can, because it allows you to empathize with something which doesn't exist, you know. Yeah, I mean, on an emotional level, I feel like I'm coming from the same place as you. It's very hard to intellectualize why I wanted to make Family, except I was a musician who'd been in a lot of scenes, and, you know, a lot of being a musician can be quite painful, you know, very, very painful, because you give so much of yourself to people, and most of the time it doesn't work out, you know, one way or another, and it's like a really bad breakup, and it's very existential, you know. And I think it probably doesn't help that music has, and the music industry actually has this way of convincing you that you're very important when you're doing very little, you know. So that's kind of, you know, it's a bad thing. But like, yeah, I mean, there was 20 years of music making and 20 years of being a musician in public in one form or another since my first band when I was 13, poured into that game in one way or another. It was just directed into the lives of other people, you know. So that's, I guess that's the most kind of emotionally sort of acute sort of thing that I could say about it, you know, is it came very easily. And that's often a sign that you're just writing your own story, really, you know.
And I think there's some analogs to kind of indie game development these days in this modern era to music of this time, where we're kind of seeing an influx with the kind of the democratization of all these tools that allow, you know, like you said, just touching Unity back in February and being able to produce something so amazing. I think we're experiencing some issues right now where it's harder for a lot of these games to reach the surface and to discover them.
Well, you say that, I mean, you know.
Well, this example is a little bit...
You're the wrong person to talk to.
Yeah, well, no, true. But I think you would agree that in general, this is not necessarily the case, right? It's not the common trajectory that you had in terms of... And I think part of that, we can't divorce your game development from your music, right? Because if you didn't have that, true. That's a full extension.
I mean, I could say I have 20 years of experience in the thing that I made.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 20 years.
Sure.
You know, that'd be a lot more realistic if I said I've been developing games for 20 years. But you know, it's like, you know, can't he do pixels? But like, I think with family, it's distinct though from what we have now in the terms of the insularity of it. And we're going back to the pre-internet thing here, right? Which is we're talking about a very small group of people who really know they're in each other's pockets a lot of the time. And they're living in this very small world, of often a certain amount of poverty. Like, there is some hints that some people went on to be very successful, but mostly they seem to be sort of, schlepping around one gig to another gig, etc. And they're kind of doing it for the love of something.
Yeah.
Be it the love of being different, or be it the love of music, or be it the love of just being in a gang. That's kind of a thing. And I think that is something that we will not have again because people can put their stuff out there in a more public way, even if it's not seen by that many people. It's out there, and these bands could really genuinely, gone. I mean, they're consigned to bargain bins and record labels and stuff like that. But I don't know. I mean, the funny thing is, the more I intellectualize it, the less I understand about why I react to it emotionally. Because I could say, oh, well, it's about discovering it, but I'm not really into history programs. I'm not really into genealogy. I made a game with a family tree because I thought a family tree was a good way of framing the narrative of a set of relationships between people over time. And that's what I'm really interested in, which is relationships over time. Because that's where the interesting stories are, And I guess it's just what I probably find moving about family is just the fact that these people exist. I mean, they exist in a narrative fiction, but they exist living and breathing, and they have this life, and they have these relationships, and that kind of took on its own thing,
Absolutely.
really, and it's consistent,
And for the players to read in and kind of take these pieces, and like you said, the kind of the visceral reaction to Alex Adams, right? Like that people have taken all these things together, and through understanding those connections and those relationships, feel
projected onto them what they see. Yeah, I mean, something which is really interesting. So I have this very very brilliant sound designer called Alex Horowitz, who's a good friend, and he played it. He was one of the first players, and he was actually the first person who said this is good, which was nice to hear, particularly from him actually. And he said, I thought it was really interesting that Clanger and Little Red Marks are just off to the side, doing their own thing. And I was like, that is. I mean, I was completely aware of that when I was programming, and I thought that would be the natural way for it to be, because those synth bands were a bit off to the side, Soft Cell, Tears for Fears, that sort of thing, and they did make bank when a lot of indie bands fell apart, and they probably were considered less cool. And they kind of kept, and I wanted them in there because I wanted to swathe of 80s music. I didn't want it to just be about like guitars, but yeah, I mean, people just see they see lots of stuff in it, and it's great. It's really, really cool. It's nice, and it's like I said, it's one of the great pleasures of sharing art in public is you get to hear what people think of it. Get to be surprised.
Absolutely. I want to put a screenshot up of the remains of Richard Fleming here. I know we're kind of going a little longer on time. Are you still okay?
No, I'm good. I'm as good as long as you are.
Okay, cool. So I played this. What everybody's seeing right here. This is one of Tim's other games, The Remains of Richard Fleming. I played this game after Family. I'll actually ask you to kind of give a description of this game. You'll do, I'm sure, a better job than I.
Go on, have a go.
I'll take too long. Okay, so the idea behind this game is it's very similar to Family in certain ways, but different in others. So what you're seeing on the screen there, of course, the similarities is that you have this notebook to be able to look at text references, and then you also have these audio logs on the right hand side. And in this game, you have to specifically select 3 individuals, a saboteur, a bomber, and a traitor. And what differentiates it from Family is that you have to make all of the choices and submit at once. So unlike Family, where you have an opportunity to kind of get some validation over whether your answers are correct or not during the course of the game, this one I would say is a bit more high stakes.
Yeah,
And
as it should be, right? As
yes,
it should be for
considering
spy.
considering the theme, and since it's kind of more British focused theme, I might toss it over to
Turnover.
you.
All
Yeah,
right. So this is a piece of genre fiction, right? So this draws very, very closely on a very British genre of spy. So in America, I'm guessing that James Bond is the most famous spy, right? And then there's
sure,
Jason Bourne,
sure.
who kind of emphasizes a more kind of guerrilla warfare, like post 9/11 sort of
Yes.
take, 360-degree threat, you'd call it, of a spy movie. And there's not a lot of spying. And British spy television and particularly radio drama was very much built on two writers, which is Graham Greene and John le Carre.
Yeah.
And both of them former spies, so they're not terribly long in the service, particularly for Graham Greene. And they wrote with a very high journalistic level of detail and often very dramatic plots, but they built in a it's closer to something like The Wire, really. And it's not a social document, but it had that level of kind of novelistic plotting, And so, for instance, like there was a film of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which came out a few years ago with Gary Oldman. But for people who know it, the peerless version of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy was the 6 or 7 episode British TV show in the 1980s with Alec Guinness. Obviously you know him from Obi-Wan Kenobi and stuff like that. And he spoke a lot like this. And there was a lot of people wandering into rooms and having conversations about there's a mole at the top of the circus, which means that there's a spy in our midst, and that everything is done very slowly and often through quite a lot of paperwork and a little bit of spying, and eventually incredibly dramatic things happen. Like they manage to blackmail and bring over the head of the Russian Secret Service. And this is because he's got a daughter who he has been hiding in Switzerland because she has some difficulties, and they find this out through this and this and this and this and this. It's not process driven, it is still dramatically driven, but it's about men in shabby overcoats, in shabby rooms, and in shabby bars doing spy work.
Yeah.
And they all speak like this, you see, and they drink a lot of whiskey. And so that's what it is. So when I was making it for these, there's this really, really wonderful games jam runner called Charles M on, who's an Australian, he runs for, so I built it for him. I wanted to do like a shortened version of Family, but with more audio. I wanted to have things where you had to cross-reference the audio with the text. And so generally speaking, I'm guessing you got The Saboteur last, right?
I actually have a whole set of notes, so I can tell you. You know what? Let me pull those notes up. Actually, people get a flash of them on the screen right there. Oh, here, hold on 1 second. I think that's correct.
So I wanted to experiment with something which you can do with, because there's only 3, right? So how do you make a game with 3 difficult? Like Family, the first 3 is pretty like tick 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 done.
Yeah, Saboteur was definitely last.
So how do you do it? So the way that you do it is you start by creating chains of information, right? So you have chains which are dependent on other chains, and you could do this feasibly forever. And actually, you could create a really freaking complex game of this. So let's just take an example. Okay, so I'm not going to take it from the game, but let's say someone has assassinated someone, and someone has seen the assassin running and they're wearing a blue raincoat, right? So that's one source. They're wearing a blue raincoat, but we still don't know who that person is. We need to identify who it is. So it goes to another source, and someone's saying, oh, could you take a message for my wife? I'm not going to be home for dinner. I'm just sort of making this up on the spot at the moment. I'm not going to be home for dinner. I need to see Percy, that sort of thing. And he goes and he says, hi, Percy, here's your coat, something like that. And or something like, or in the middle clue, it could be like something like she's saying, oh, it looked purple in that light, or something like that. So you wouldn't be able to get it from any one of the clues. So it'd be like blue anorak. Oh, I thought it was purple. Oh, it turns out it's that color. Can't get it from that one. And then he says, Percy, here's your anorak back. Okay. So that's a blue anorak going back to Percy. So Percy is the assassin. Okay. So, so that would be like a chain of logic where it's not technically deducible from any single clue, but you can put them all together. And I wanted to explore those chains. And so with The Saboteur, I'm not going to spoil it, but there's something to do with ethnicity in there. there's a reference which starts in the intro, so you might not spot it, but although it is referenced again,
Yeah.
and then you have to do a process of elimination with someone else being spoken to, and you have to take away the person who's being spoken to and look to the other person because that's who's doing the sabotaging. And so that's a chain of clues,
Yes.
and I'm probably not going to do that in the sequel. I might do one of them because actually, the more problems you have, the more it becomes a complete head fuck. But when you have only 3 or 4, you have to engage in those sorts of chains because otherwise it's over. You know, it could be like, oh.
And you're referring to the companion to family. You're not necessarily saying there's a sequel to.
Yeah, the companion to family
Okay.
will not play
Gotcha.
games like that.
Yeah, I was curious if you were going to take this in a sequelized direction.
No, I mean Fleming is an exercise in economical storytelling. I think it's very very tight, and it has some.
Absolutely.
My favorite bit of voice acting in it, which is I have a friend who's in an English show called Ghosts, Lawrence Rickard, and he does this thing. Do you remember the bit where he's like talking about the bomb and he tells the story about the bomb?
Absolutely.
And I wrote that down and I read it back. I was like, that's not good enough. You know, I was like, this looks terrible. Like, who's going to believe that? Because it's a bit like we were saying, you know, well, the problem was we can set off a bomb at this Russian's house, but, you know, this girl's house, the Russian was seeing it, but then the foreign secretary turns up. I was thinking, this is a mad contrivance. But the way you read it, I was like, fuck yeah.
It was excellent. I really enjoyed. I got to say, like, it was like a kind of unnerving experience. Like, once you start piecing things together and realizing how high stakes it all, I'd imagine most people, and I'd probably recommend this to most people, probably to have notes on the side. I'd imagine that's probably the best way to play it. That's
also,
how
these are kind of bad dudes as well, aren't they? It involves a failed coup in Cairo, you know, which is a very colonialist thing to do. Actually, I think, you know, I think there's just been some documents which revealed that the British were involved in the Iranian coup 10 years earlier. So, I mean, you know, that sort of thing. I didn't actually know about that. But then also like setting off a bomb in Mayfair. I mean, quite obviously, I thought based on the bit from Munich, you know, which I probably in the back of my head. But, you know, like that's bad, you know. And then there's a traitor who murders someone, you know, that's bad. Like,
And the direction you took, I thought, was interesting in terms of revealing this, because what you were saying earlier, as far as family,
he's up front, isn't he? He's in an interview. The traitor is right there.
All of this information is up front, which is the interesting part, I think. Unlike family, where after you get some, you show that you're making some correct deductions, then you are given more and more information as time goes on. This game presents you all of it, and at first I will say I was slightly overwhelmed, looking at all this information.
It's a bottle. It's what you call a bottle episode, isn't it? It's like, in TV shows where they have a bottle episode, like Fly in Breaking Bad and stuff like that.
Yeah.
This is if family is the series, then this is the bottle episode.
It's a
shot
reference. Yeah, and it's an incredibly exciting experience. And to your point about everything we discussed with family, you definitely start to kind of piece these characters together and who they are, and kind of some of their kind of potential motivations involved, and who to trust.
The traitor is based on someone real, and in fact, actually, that speech he gives is almost word for word. You can find it on Wikipedia. I think it's George Blake. That's almost verbatim. Which I thought was at the time, I thought that's an interesting thing to do. I'm actually going to take a verbatim speech, lightly rewrite it, and then get my very posh friend John say, well, when I was, it's like, because that's a real thing. And actually, you didn't have to do a lot of making up for this stuff. Or if you did make it up, if you were kind of familiar with it, it ended up being true anyway. It was kind of like, I think it's probably in the water or something in Britain. We just sort of, it's what we do. We write spy novels, but, it was a pleasure, Richard Fleming. It was like a 2-day build with like some voice. With the voice acting always takes a little bit of time, but the Foley was fun as well. That was really good. Like getting the sound effects in and stuff. That's something I didn't do in family, like the slamming of doors, and that's really cool.
The muffled sound of the other person that you can't hear, the individual talking.
Oh yeah. No, my favorite bit in the whole game is when I'm doing this voice, because I do quite a lot of the voices in the game, and there's a bit where I'm on the phone. I go, and this and that, and then he goes, I go, I don't know. It's like that's not
Yeah.
dialogue. Like that would not that again, Horizon Zero Dawn, no one's gonna be going like other end of the telephone. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like something we have so much of this in Britain, like just like the Archers or something, you know. But it's like, yeah, I just yes, it was a lot of fun. And then I made the Russian doll in a big rush for a
And I'll
Bracky's
show
game
that
jam, which was
screenshot
it was
up
the
here.
worst. It was the worst game jam to put it in because it's all 10-year-olds like with copied Unity code, and actually it had some bugs in the WebGL, so I just pulled it. I kept it as download only, which it seemed to work fine in, but WebGL is completely bugged.
I have the a screenshot from the main game area of the Russian doll. Do you want to describe that one as well? It's a bit different.
Oh yeah, Russian Doll is different. I mean, what would you say? Well, I mean, what was your experience with Russian Doll? Did you actually enjoy playing it?
I enjoyed it. I will say I was frustrated at the beginning just because in retrospect it probably should have occurred to me earlier. But in the tutorial it kind of says you have to find. Well, let me go back real quick. Let me give some context to those who are watching this. So in this case, it's kind of a similar setting of sorts, kind of the espionage setting. Um, And in this case, what you are trying to do is take these famous sections of different books, and there's kind of these like mathematical puzzles to solve out of them that lead on to the next puzzle, and to listen to different tracks and to come up with
Did
a
you
final
finish
coded
it?
solution. Yes, I did. Yeah, I will say
Hey!
I got but what I had to do was slightly different, and I may be saying things that the
Just listen
viewers
through them.
won't
Yeah.
understand right now. But what I ended up having to do at one point, because I made a mistake that upon like once I finally figured it out, it was one of those you hit yourself in the head and realize it was the one about the kid counting houses.
Counting houses,
I
right?
don't
Yeah.
even want to talk about
Yeah.
how the
Well,
simple error I made there. But what I ended up
but
having to do was like pick the different tracks, and I went through the tracks to start to
you just figure
see
out the words,
the
yeah, and
ones that
then
were
rearrange the
mathematical,
words.
and then I linked them all, and then I saw at one point that I had this chain and this chain of tracks, and there was a disconnect, and so I had to find what I
Yeah,
was
I
doing
find what
wrong.
word. And you know what? That's completely legitimate. And like, I think that's like, I think the weird thing about Russian Doll is I don't think it's actually a very good game. Like, this is my thing, which is I think it's too complex. I think the idea is too close to what an actual spy might do. Like, apart from the fact that I think it's in the 80s and like they're using this, like, I think also it's got a Walkman in it, doesn't it? It's a really nicely drawn Walkman.
Yeah,
Thank you. The singer who sang Alex Adams is a genius illustrator.
really nice
That's his
connection there.
Walkman. He also does all the art on Guacamole as well, which is
Nice.
my other game.
Yes.
So like the different game, but like yeah, no, Russian Doll is the idea about Russian Doll is that there's an embassy which is under siege, and they're sending out everything out through the post. And so what they have to do is disguise everything so it doesn't look like it's secret documents. And so someone sends you a tape, which is what is termed by the British Secret Service, not really, I made up the term, a Russian doll, because it contains a multitude of information within it. It contains many things where it looks like one thing on the outside, right? And so what I did, and this was all a bit rushed, really, but like what I did is I found a load of extracts for English literature, and then I actually made up my own extracts for English literature in the style of various authors, you know. So it wasn't actually, you know, George Orwell and stuff. I made it up myself, and then I read, you know, 25 or so tracks, and within those is a chain of tracks which lead one to another through a series of mathematical puzzles which spell out the words, which lead to how to find the opposition leader and stuff like that, which is again dark as fuck, you know.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I get it. I mean, I kind of feel like I think that is a legitimate dead end. Like, I think that what's quite interesting about that is Richard Fleming. When you look at that, you're like, that could be a whole lot more. And in fact, you know, I'm doing more with that sort of thing. And that is definitely part of something which has legs because it has the human element in it. And Russian Doll is incredibly depersonalized. Like, I do actually really like the voice acting, but to me, the intro is the best thing about it. You know, is that the all that good radio stuff at the beginning is good, but there's no personal element, there's no human element, and I think that's the interesting thing is that I kind of discovered the limitations of this is if you leave the people out of it, you lose a lot of the game, you know. And I think that Russian Doll lives as a kind of little brother to Richard Fleming. Like if you enjoy period pieces, you might enjoy Tinkering with Russian Doll, or if you're a very engineering based sort of person, you might enjoy it. But I doubt you'd enjoy Richard Fleming for the story and then enjoy Russian Doll as much. You know, it was just, again, it was a 2-day build, and it was like, I really like making stuff in pairs. Like I really, really like making stuff in pairs. I like Lightning to Strike Twice, and I think that, like, I made Smooth Operators. I made Smooth Operators 2. Like, you know, only my parents played the first one, so it's, yeah. So it's like, I think pairs are a really, really good thing for games. So I wanted to make a pair, and I had some excuse, and I did it. But I think that from a gameplay perspective, that sort of thing is a bit of a dead end, where Richard Fleming and family and stuff has legs, you know.
I don't know.
That's
I
my
mean, I could see how this could be incorporated in as like a
yeah,
section of something larger. I really
yeah,
think there's
yeah,
potential there, and then maybe also one of those things where in like a future game of yours, it's not like a like kind of a module all to its own, but then you could
yeah.
cross-reference potentially other kind of
Yeah,
multimedia
that's
information.
true. That's true. And also, no one's ever done a game where you embed numerical clues in classic literature. I mean, you know, that's another thing to be said, which is if someone's knocking around, if someone's listening to this and being like, what I really want to do is read something that looks a lot like Charlotte Bronte, but actually contains Pythagoras' theorem, or the Isaac Asimov binary question,
Yeah.
which is absolute fucker. Like,
Oh,
so it's
that
like,
was one of my favorite
that's
ones,
one of your
actually.
favorites, you know.
Yeah.
But like a lot of people, like the other big problem I have is, you know, I have a lot of foreign language gamers as well, and they're like, "What the fuck?" you know, like, I'm googling everything constantly. You know, I think I've managed to, you know, it's mostly just English speaking now. They've just given up on me. But yeah,
I think
no,
the
I mean,
hardest part was the beginning and the end for me. The first part, like for some reason, it didn't
yes,
immediately come to
yeah,
me. The whole idea that I what I was doing exactly, uh, you know, because at first you're just prompted like finding the solution, and it does reference the mathematical piece. But I guess maybe just coming off of the other games, I wasn't exactly sure what to
I
do.
think it's counterintuitive. The leading thing, the whole thing that one is the solution, but it also leads to somewhere else, is actually super counterintuitive. So yeah, I think when I was making it, I was like, this is not good, you know. So I was like, I was trying to make it as clear as I could, but you know, it was a game jam game. You know, and sometimes you just, that's what game jams are good for. I mean, not Brackies, that's a terrible game jam, but you just put it out, you know.
I encourage people to play it though. I really do. I mean, I feel like that's I really enjoyed it. It took me, like I said, a second, but once I got in there and got it, you have that same like satisfying aha moment. I think that's something that I found through all of these games is
Yeah,
that sense of like personal accomplishment after it.
yeah, 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 that's cool.
And you know, it's not like there's walkthroughs available, nor should people be using those. And I think you even wrote on like one of the itch forum stuff that, of course, with these games,
You know.
yeah, like you could guess, sure, you could guess in this stuff, but it's not the same experience. It's one of those things where you should be sitting there trying to ponder.
Well, I
For
said in Richard Fleming, I said, do not feel you need to guess. It's all fair. Like,
yeah,
I feel like the one thing that Lucas Pope got wrong in Obra Dinn, you know, very mildly, is he said that, you know, you may need to have process of elimination or kind of guess, essentially, what he's just saying, you know, and I kind of felt like you've got to play fair with the audience. I mean, you can be tricksy sometimes, but like the opportunity to lead people down blind alleys is so easy because games work through orienting the player. Like, it's surprising. Like, I often write a whole load of stuff and I think that's a bit on the nose, isn't it? You know, and then you think, no, because it's a game. And half of everything is just telling the player through subtle signposts and language where to go next. You know, that's what you're doing.
sure.
You're just telling them to go, you know, and that's like, look at big games, that's all they're doing a lot of the time. Go here, go there, Call of Duty, follow that guy's ass, you know, it's shoot that, run that.
Yeah, with that said, I mean, before we started this call, we were talking about, you know, some detective games, and we were talking, we both enjoy Game Maker's Toolkit on YouTube. It's one of my favorite YouTube shows, really also based out of the UK. Can you kind of give some examples of games that have done detective work and deduction well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've mentioned somewhat. I think that they're like. I mean, we should talk about point and clicks, right? Because I think that's the elephant in the room here, right? Which is we should talk about our point and click detective games, and I would say that not having played that many, but it doesn't strike me that they are in the way that we're talking about it, because I think that if you look at something like Obra Dinn, which is really a capsule world, there is within it, accessible to the player, a complete information set, or as complete as you need to complete it. But it doesn't rely on a kind of tortuous internal logic of, give the goat the poison so it'll kick the woman so it'll run down the boat, that sort of thing. And remember with Monkey Island, those constant combinations of click here, put there, there.
Sure.
So to my mind, those are puzzle games, but they're not detective games, which means that we have to now rule out almost all of the UI-based, puzzle games of a certain period of time. So where do we start? Myst? I don't know. It's
Why do
tricky to
you?
know.
Why do you? I guess I understand your logic up to the point of saying like kind of wave them
Well,
all
what
off. I
I'm
mean, of
trying to
course, there's many that still I think incorporate kind of detective.
Yeah, but the problem is that they're not this mod. If we're talking about Obra likes or modern detective games, or really, actually, this is what Mark Brown's talking about when he's talking about his love of her story. Of course, he then later talks about Obra Dinn in his most innovative game of the year, and he talks about the same stuff. Is this ability to use your brain in a way it connects up with your own external knowledge. And the thing about point and clicks is they don't. Point and clicks are entirely reliant on the internal mechanics of the game. It might make no sense in the world, but it makes sense in the game by the rules that it's designed.
There's those
And
egregious
that
examples. I remember Monkey Island trying to get that
exactly,
map off the person's back with like the
yeah,
sunburn, sunscreen. There's so
that
many of those.
I would say that is different. So with her
Sure.
story, you're playing her story and you're actually thinking, this is a real person. What is this person saying? How are they saying it? What do they look like? What are they wearing? There you're looking at it like you're connecting up all those soft skills that you've developed over your life. And with Obra, people are guessing the people from shoes. They're guessing them from trinkets. They're guessing it from accents. They're guessing it from sound effects. They're actually, and it's interesting to say that. I mean, there's a point, someone asked me, like, how do you do all the internal consistency? I was like, when you get to a certain point, it's easier to do it, internal consistency, because otherwise you're just creating more work for yourself. You might as well, even I was making with a new game today, and I was, back in 1997 for some stuff, and I was just checking dates on a calendar, being like, oh, that was a Saturday. You might as well just actually make it a real Saturday, so that if push comes to shove, you have to be like, well, that happened then, and why not? Just so I just think there's not that many. That's the problem with detective games, is there's a lot of games where you're pretending to be a detective, like you're role playing or you're cast as a detective. But I would think calling LA Noire a game of detection wouldn't be correct, would it? Because it's more a game of picking up stuff and watching really creepy cutscenes. It's the extent of which you're actually able to detect anything by looking at people's facial expressions, I would say, is extremely limited. I think it's quite, and of course it's quite sort of troubled game anyway. I just think it's kind of, no one has ever gone down that road again, have they? They've never gone down like the Quantic Dream, LA Noire,
Yeah.
no one's done that
How
again.
do you feel about things like other games that were referenced in that Game Maker's Toolkit program, like Vanishing of Ethan Carter or the Phoenix Wright kind of the Ace Attorney series?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't played a ton of that, but what I understand is it's all about, you've got to present the right bit of evidence in the right way. That seems to me like technically close to point and click. In it's got to make, it makes internal sense, but it doesn't need to be like what I would like. So I'd play a game, right? So I'm obsessed with copyright. Okay, so I'm obsessed with a certain ginger songwriter who I can't name, who comes from England, who steals everyone's songs, and he's constantly stealing songs. And he pays a small fortune in royalties. He's very big. You'll probably know who I'm talking about. I can't really mention it, but he's constantly.
Probably. I don't keep up with the pop scene too much.
What I would like is a game where you had to go through songs and prove copyright breaking, right? So you'd have the sheet music, you'd have the songs, and you'd have to point out the bits where they were similar.
It's a great idea.
That is a detection game, because yes, there would be a right answer, but you'd be using all these skills you're bringing in, and I think that I don't know Vanishing of Ethan Carter. I know that's something else. I think of Alan Wake. No, I don't know Ethan Carter at all, actually.
That one employed a mechanic where it was a Polish game, actually. I know we both share
Hey,
Polish
hey,
heritage there.
love it.
And the idea there was you were actually, a lot of these games, one of the central kind of like mechanics is almost like proving that you understand the solution, right? It's not
Yeah,
enough to just
yeah.
simply guess their attitude. So
Got to show you're working.
yes,
To show
yeah.
you're working.
Yeah, and with Vanishing of Ethan Carter, the idea was that you got bits and pieces of information. So, for example, you could see like a crime was committed in this specific area, but you actually had to arrange them kind of in chronological order.
Uh-huh,
And I haven't
uh-huh.
played it since it was released, but you kind of almost had these like kind of ghostly like recreations of those scenes of what happened, and you would have to like create a timeline of sorts to be able to
Yeah.
show how it happened.
There is another genre of game which actually Mark Brown talks about, which is actually a really good detective genre. And actually, I think you probably could call these detective games in a way, which is what I'd call, which is the clockwork games, right? So they're games that run on continuous time loops. So my question
Like Sexy
is
Brutale, that sort of thing.
right. So
Yeah.
Sexy Brutale, I was actually going to talk about.
Yeah.
So Sexy Brutale, for people who don't know, it is a game where uh, people are murdered over a certain course of a day, and you have to prevent their murders, and you're a spirit, and you have to do it. But essentially, what it is you've got to detect, you've got to understand, and you've got to act creatively in order to deal with it. I really liked it because,
I
in a
loved
weird
it.
way, it kind of reminded me of those old. I've been playing Desperados recently. It reminded me of those old
Mm.
Commandos games as well, where you got to use the environment in lots of
Yes.
interesting ways. And I really like Cavalier. I'd really like to do an internship there, actually. But we'll see, see what I can do. They're up in Guildford. They're part of the Bullfrog lot. It's a great
Yeah.
lineage
They have a
of
lot of. Yeah.
yeah, and also like grotesquerie as well, which is like I think like Britain's greatest gift to gaming is the ability to like put grotesquerie and humor into
I think
mainstream
you might have.
games.
Were you referencing Dungeon Keeper on Twitter? That might have been you that I
Yeah,
saw.
like
Yeah.
grotesquerie and like Dungeon Keeper and like Fable as well,
Yeah.
and yeah. And Cavalier does that, and they're continuing that. But I also think that like is Outer Wilds a detective game? Not Outer Worlds, Outer
Outer
Wilds.
Wilds. It's a good question. I mean, I guess we would have to like establish the full criteria of like what detective games would be, but I can certainly.
I mean, family's not got a detective in it. It ain't got no crime. So what
Sure.
makes it any more of a detective game than Outer Wilds?
Ooh, that's a good question. My initial instinct would be to include it for many of the reasons that I think for many of the reasons it shares with the Sexy Brutale, but um, I do wonder kind of like what would be our like base criteria in order to put that because you got me wanting.
Right.
This is one I might have to ponder like and sleep on for a little while because that is
Because
a good
because
question.
without a wilds, the complexifying element is time, right? Because otherwise it would be a walking simulator, right? But because stuff is changing in time, you need to detect what's happening at certain times in day and then kind of triangulate it. And then there's also a kind of light strategy element to it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that Outer Wilds is, I think pound for pound, the most remarkable indie game that I can think of that's come out in the last 5 years. Doesn't mean I enjoyed it as much as everything. I do think it's actually is a wonderful game, but like I think that in terms of sheer innovation
Yeah.
and sheer and also sheer execution as well and playability is it's completely ridiculous what they did and the way that they kind of cut the knot of No Man's Sky as well.
Mm,
They said it doesn't need to be like this because you don't need 16 billion planets that all look the same. You can just complexify things by adding time.
exactly. And
That's
in
it.
world building, like truly building. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
big difference between those two, of course, is that No
Yeah.
Man's Sky doesn't really, in many ways, I actually appreciate what those developers did with the game, and especially the updates over
Oh
time.
yeah.
But I will say, it kind of felt at least early on somewhat soulless. Like in terms of there wasn't enough kind of content there. Content meaning kind of this world building that we're kind of
Well, there's
looking
a
to in the
static
Outer
element,
Wilds.
isn't there? Which is the world is it's obviously deterministic, and
Hmm.
you imagine that in traveling to different places, you'll experience a great diversity of things. But what Outer Wilds does is it just has a very small world, but it's over time. So there are many experiences with it, just depending on where you get there. If you get to the hourglass planet at certain times and stuff like that. So I
Sure.
think games that play with time, I think is a good way of you could easily make a proper detective game using a clockwork mechanism, and actually it would probably look a lot like these games. That's what I think. If you did make a detective game
Yeah.
with a detective, it would end up looking a lot like Sexy Brutale or something like
You know,
that.
you
That's my
immediately this immediately hit me with, and I don't think this was actually covered in Game Maker's Toolkit, but one of a game that I absolutely loved was Jordan Mechner's The Last Express. I
I
played it
haven't
when
played.
those came out. So yeah, this is Jordan Mechner, the creator of Prince of Persia.
Okay, cool.
He did a rotoscoped adventure game, which, from my understanding, I think when they created the game, they already knew that it was not going to sell enough to make back its budget. They did real world actors, drew on top of it, really amazing. But to your point
Yeah,
about
because that's
time,
how they did in Prince of Persia, didn't they, as well? And
yeah,
he was in Prince of Persia, was it? You got a time limit in Prince of Persia, don't you?
I know, I think the newer ones, the Sands of Time,
No,
they explored the like
the
time
original one.
reversal. But the unique thing about The Last Express is that the whole game was in real time. I think Blade Runner
Mhm.
did this similarly as well. The
Yeah,
the Westwood Studios point and click, and in those games, the events of the games would occur whether you were there or not. So your actual
yeah,
activity in the game made a difference in terms of what you were able to observe, what you were able to stop, the
yeah.
consequences of the character's actions.
I mean, some games do that really well. I mean, there's obviously the very famous Deus Ex example, which everyone gives about everything that's the hostages. But Hitman does that. I mean,
Yeah.
disrupting AI routines is another good thing, and there is a detection portion to Hitman, which is arguably, I mean, it's very well signposted. It's you wouldn't want to make a pure detective game out of a Hitman thing. I mean, Jesus Christ, it'd be hard to sell and be a lot of work. But like, you could. There's something in there. I wouldn't want to do it. Bloody hell, But it's like I think it's just about this kind of having a complexifying element in there, which adds something live and dynamic into that. Now, I don't actually have access to that in my games. They're all static, so I have to use language to complexify stuff. So I have to bury my clues in story
Hmm.
and stuff like that and find a way to keep it fair. But you could use mechanics, actual proper real game mechanics like real games use as well. It's just harder.
Yeah.
You don't get to build them in 2 weeks. so I'd be very excited to see that. Yeah, and I might have to sit down and make that copyright thing. That'd be
Yeah, that count me as
extremely.
your first playtester for that, because I
It's
love
so
the idea of
dark
that.
though, man, because it's so bad. Like the way they judge copyright off sheet music, like it's so shitty. Like Katy Perry getting sued and like Blurred Lines getting sued. Like it really shouldn't happen.
And I believe the laws for the UK are slightly different than the US in that regard. Do you know if that's the case?
I don't know. I don't know, but this will be important to know.
Yeah,
This will
you
be
might want to check that out, because I
that
know
take
there's some subtle differences in our judicial systems there. That, I mean, like from libel laws to everything. I know there's some.
libel laws are very
Yeah,
serious in England, which I can't name any particular songwriters, but yeah, it's
yeah, yeah.
so it goes. So it goes in case he's watching. But yeah, so that's that's me. So where do we go from here?
Well, you know what? I'd love to continue this as much as possible.
Yeah,
We have to prepare for another
wrap
stream coming
just
up.
a mere hour and 40
I know,
minutes.
only, but I want to get a promise from you
Taste
to come on again soon, even if
Yeah.
not to discuss your games, just to discuss indie games in general, because I think we've
Oh yeah,
unpacked a
that's
lot
great.
of things here that I would love to discuss further.
Definitely.
And I
Well,
just want to
where
reiterate how much I love the games you've created. I'm incredibly excited to see that they're getting more and more attention. I hope that this will serve in some way to help spread the word. Our small operation here will get the word out in some way to some people, and we can't wait to see what else you have in store for us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Tim, and we'll be talking soon. And for everybody who is watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, whether you're watching live or at some other point in the future, we really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And make sure, as you see at the top of the screen, to follow Tim on Twitter. And you can check out the itch.io page he has to be able to play all his games. And while Tim did say that they were all free, go ahead and pay what you can for them. I know he would certainly appreciate that.
Yeah, although you can only pay for family. There is
Oh,
actually no
family is the only
donation.
one. Yes.
There's no
Okay.
donation. But
Okay.
pay what you like. Pay as if you were buying the whole bundle
Yeah.
for $10. Yeah. So yeah. Thank
Awesome.
you. That was great. Really enjoyed it.
Really
Wouldn't stay
enjoyed it.
an hour and 40 if I didn't.
No, it was fantastic. We'll do it again sometime soon.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, yeah. Catch you soon, man. Take